it is my hope that with this evening's meeting we can start sort of a new cycle. And in the coming year, maybe not immediately in February, but soon thereafter, we'll devote ourselves to a more, a more detailed commentary on the Red Book, and adding to it perhaps a few from the Black Book as well, because I love to brag, and so I'm going to do it. I'm bragging about the fact that when the Red Book was published, which was again 2009, when we were in Budapest, yes, and 2009, I volunteered and was commissioned to give 13 lectures on the contents of the Red Book, beginning with the beginning and the end, which I did, and they were the first detailed interpretations of the Red Book. So it is helpful to brag about the past, because it may ensure a better reception in the present. So that is why I'm mentioning it. And inasmuch as I did that once, although when I was much younger and more active, I feel that allowing for certain differences, I may still be able to do something of the same sort again, and so you may look forward, if I'm still in the body, which one should say when one is 93 years old, I hope to do another longer and detailed interpretation of the Red Book with some additions from the Black Book in this present year. But don't look for it right away, however it will be there. And this evening I was sort of trying to introduce that subject in a fairly general manner. Now, what we need to keep in mind in order to perhaps, if we are thus inclined, place these events into a larger framework, into a larger picture, what we may need to remember is that as far as one can discern historically, in all throughout the known history of the human race, there have always been, more or less every century, although there are some differences, more or less every century, there have been outbursts of the esoteric tradition, whatever we may call it. We Gnostics call it Gnosis, and as such, there has been a continuity of information, of teaching, of inspiration, whatever we may wish to call it, almost as far back as we can count. And heaven knows, we certainly hope that into the future as well. Now, that being the case, it is understandable that when it came to the 20th century, and it sort of its tail end in the 21st, there would also be a new revelation forthcoming, a new way of manifesting and communicating the ancient truths to humanity. So 100 years earlier, in 1875 in New York City, the organization in whose building we are sitting, the Theosophical Society, was founded, and with its great and unusual and hilarious and wonderful cigarette-smoking founder H.P. Blavatsky. Now, I am not personally terribly devoted to cigarettes, but show me a good cigar and I'll follow you anywhere. So let's say that is just thrown in as a bit of interest. So let us say from 1875, a significant chapter of the intellectual and spiritual revelations directed toward the understanding of the deeper qualities of human nature came about. And it started an entire cycle of just about a century, after which time, of course, right before the turn of the century, the Russian lioness, Madame Blavatsky, went to her ancestors, who were for the most part all princes of the Russian Empire, for that matter. In fact, just recently, I'll mention it, there have been some interesting data that have come to the fore concerning some of her relatives and how the influence of the esoteric orientation of her great-grandfather, Prince Dolgoruki, had impelled the young, at that time probably early teenager Blavatsky to devote herself to the esoteric, because her great-grandfather possessed a fabulous library in his castle, which probably for about 90% was devoted to alchemy. And if you look at the more or less house organ of the Theosophical Society, Quest magazine, which has been edited now by a second good friend of mine, by Richard Smalley, you will see there that Blavatsky states in a letter to her great-grandfather, that is her, in any event, it's on her mother's side. The princely Dolgoruki families were the original rulers of Kiev, the grand princes of Kiev. So there is a little connection with all this rigmarole now about Ukraine, which was not called Ukraine at that time. But Saint Vladimir, the Orthodox saint, the founder of the Dolgoruki dynasty, was the Grand Prince of Kiev, and among his descendants is Madame Blavatsky's mother's family. So whether that is of any interest or not, but it is not unusual in history, if you look at it with open eyes and with eyes which not have a red Soviet veil in front of it. It is you will understand that these connections of the nobles of the land with the nobility of the spirit are by no means non-existent. And then that is what we have found there. Now, after that little extolling of aristocracy, spiritual or otherwise, I may move forward into what I hope is this evening's subject, namely to the fact, yes, that, old age has been connected with the feebleness of voice. And I'm afraid that it afflicts me every once in a while too. So when you can't quite hear my voice, then do various gestures, just lift up your hand and one thing or the other, and then I may or may not get your the signal of your distress. But in any event, let us say you can see, for instance, with the greatest of clarity now in the chapter in the present Quest magazine, the Journal of the Theosophical Society in America, that H.P. Blavatsky, as a young girl, had stated in several letters, primarily those addressed to her Russian relatives, that she had been impelled to move into the field of esoterica primarily by way of alchemy. And that her great-grandfather had this magnificent alchemical library which she studied as a little girl, and she got sort of a particular revelation just from reading these old books. And the revelation was, as I can interpret it, and I think that's fairly accurate, the revelation was that the human being is destined and called to transform, to become more than it is. That the present stage of development, or the present in 1875 or thereabouts, is still an early stage of the development of the human spirit. But that in order to that, humans have to acquaint themselves with a certain spiritual ambience which encompasses the human being, and which, if understood and put into practice, can facilitate and perhaps even downright cause the supernal transformation of the human being. Now, to my great regret, I'll stop myself at that point. Don't be afraid. I'm not stopping really. It's a rhetorical stop. And the rhetorical stop indicates that H.P. Blavatsky, of course, died just before the change of the centuries, before the 19th century changed into the 20th century. But her work in the open, her public work, started more or less a quarter of a century before that, by way of the founding of the Theosophical Society. Now, the reason I bring that up, because not such a very long time thereafter, H.P. Blavatsky became the the person expressing the voice of this new idea of a certain future for the human being, that the human race is not finished. And this is where I had my, this is one of the many places where I had my disagreements with my fellow theosophists, because I'm just a basically disagreeable guy, you know. And if there is a disagreement, I'm going to be there. But in any event, you know, the disagreement in this case was to the effect that the great emphasis that was placed, not really so much by Blavatsky, but mostly by those who became her successors, on the Darwinian buzzword of evolution, which some of the preachers on television on Sunday night like to pronounce evolution, you know. For these reasons, there was a need to somehow bring home to people primarily in the Western culture, because there are models, let's say, for this kind of development in other cultures already, but in Western culture, to the prospect that the human is, as I think Gerald Heard, the exiled British philosopher, said back in the 50s and in the 60s, the human is an unfinished animal. Now, I wasn't so happy about the animal, but the unfinished I don't mind, because I'd like to see some further development. But let's say this unfinished quality of the human consists in various circumstances which, if we were to enumerate them all, we would be here all night, to your and my discomfort, so we are not going to do that. But what that really meant was that when the early theosophists, including Blavatsky, and I don't think you will find this much in any literature, and I read a heck of a lot of it, you know, that when the human being was characterized as evolving, and the law of the universe was described as being evolution, Madame Blavatsky meant something that a good many years later, a husky, strong Swiss doctor in the vicinity of Zurich by the name of Carl Gustav Jung had proclaimed as transformation, and by other words. This transformation or unification, which is part of the transformation, became his first buzzword, in which he described the necessary development of humanity that is still needed, and without which humanity is not going to be in a very good and a very complete shape henceforth. All right, now, so in 1875, the same year that Blavatsky and her ragtag scholarly occultist friends in New York City founded their Theosophical Society, in the same year was born in Switzerland. Carl Gustav Jung, the son of a Zwingliite Protestant preacher, and the grandson of an even more famous man of religion, who was the dean of the great Protestant church in Basel, his grandfather, and who was also almost lifetime Grandmaster of the Masonic Order in Switzerland. So, shall we say, a man of some unusual distinctions. He came from a line of unusual distinctions which migrated from Germany to Switzerland. Because Switzerland was always a sort of an unusual island. And this was true even in my days when I went to school, not very far from Switzerland, just over the mountains and over the Brenner Pass in Austria, and from whence primarily in order to partake of some of the excellent Italian wines, we would sneak over the border at the Brenner Pass to go on the weekends to Italy. And I must say we always came back much more exalted than we were when we went over. So that already, I also had some relatives in Italy, but further down in Rome. So in any event, there I learned that just a little bit over on the other side, there is a famous psychologist in Switzerland whose approach to what in those days was largely described as psychoanalysis or analytical psychology and so forth, was of an unusual nature. And his principal proclamation at that time having been that the human being needs to be integrated. Now, to be integral means to be whole. That the trouble with the trouble why human beings, or so many human beings, are incomplete in their total development is just because of that they are not complete. And this completion was initially often described as having been complexes in their nature, which often are not agreeable with each other. And that's where we got the various names for psychological complexes. And that when these complexes, these part selves, which they were, I think, also called, when the part selves in a human being are integrated, become an integral whole, then the human being has a much better chance of becoming an integral whole itself. When that is not the case, then we are sort of like a since we mentioned Russia to begin with, like a Russian troika, which has all these horses, and if they are not well trained, then one of them heads down to the Caucasus, the other one heads to the Ural Mountains, the third one heads over to what happily and joyously we once again can call St. Petersburg, to hell with Lenin and Leningrad. I've never said that before, but I felt it for decades and decades in my life, and I shall continue to feel it as long as I feel anything. In any event, sort of the transformation of the human being, therefore, that Madame Blavatsky portrayed, had very little to do with Darwin's evolution. It had everything to do with an internal and external, but primarily internal development in the human being. So that the human being in his internal makeup needs to change. And needs to change into a being that is capable of dealing with life in a unified fashion, so that we would become, instead of composed of part selves, which then much of the time argue with each other and cause an internal dissension, we could become a unified self, which in turn is under the inspiration and the guidance of a higher power. Now I know that in the contemporary secular society, that's not a very much valued term. But I remind you that the same Dr. Jung, whom we are supposed to be talking about here, the same Dr. Jung, when approached by a couple of very well-intentioned American gentlemen who were the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous, they asked him, they presented to him the founding documents of AA, and he said, this is all very good, but he says, it is never going to work unless it contains an open acknowledgement of a higher power. In other words, to put it in traditional terms, if you leave God out of it, then it ain't gonna work. And this, I think, has become a certain recognition that more and more people have adopted, although unfortunately it is still not general. But let us say, in the same year when the Theosophical Society was founded, there was maybe two important dates occurred on the esoteric horizon. One was the death of Eliphas Levi in Paris, the great reviver of the Kabbalistic Gnosis, the former Roman Catholic ordained deacon, and according to all of his biographies, one of the most well-intentioned and lovely individuals of that century. So 1875, and in 1875, Eliphas Levi exited from the scene of esoteric teachers with his magnificent works on the Kabbalah and his revival of the Tarot and so forth. That is when a more collective effort, and yet an effort that was led by an inherent wisdom, an inherent recognition of important events in the future and of important necessities which need to be brought into the human race, were started. And then from there, as we now indicated, there comes in the next century, although still born in 1875, there comes another prophetic figure. Now you may regard that as an overstatement or a hero worship or something of that sort. And I tell you what, if I want to worship a hero, Carl Gustav Jung is the one that I'm going to. Because if there ever was a multifaceted, heroic figure of the mind and of the spirit, that was it. Now, we have to take into account, however, that he was born into and then he practiced as a young student and subsequently as a medical doctor. What people thought at that time was a new science. And this new science had two principles, just like the Temple of Solomon with the two pillars that holds it up. It had two pillars holding it up, and they were Sigmund Freud in Vienna and Carl Gustav Jung in Zurich. And they were both pursuing the same thing, really, because when I had the privilege once for about close to 3 years or so of doing some literary work for my livelihood on the life and the career of Sigmund Freud. You wouldn't have expected I should have accepted one on Jung, but nobody asked me about Jung. So let's say I found out, in addition to which I also managed to pigeonhole my father, who as an Austro-Hungarian nobleman and army officer spent a lot of time in Vienna. And my father said, oh yes, I went once at Vienna University where the docent was this really good-looking but short Viennese Jewish gentleman, Freud. Aha, I said, well, that's interesting. So, the world is a small place, especially if you live in Austria-Hungary at that time. But let us say that was the great pioneer who, against much criticism and much opposition and things like that, held forth and proclaimed his discovery, which was extremely important for others like Jung subsequently. We have to remember that. If it hadn't been for Freud's discovery, Jung's analytical psychology would have progressed much, much more slowly. Because what was the great discovery? That there is a hidden human. There is something inside of us that he called in sonorous German das Unbewusste, the unconscious. And that this unconscious self, this inner human, is of extremely great importance regarding the behavior, let's see, the life pattern and the influence of a human being. If a human being is in adequate and creative contact with this mysterious inner human, das Unbewusste, the unconscious, then his chances, or her chances, of transformation of something that Jung came to call a little bit later individuation, were very great. And I need to explain that a little bit because I am of a bilingual family and I learned German as my second second native tongue, and so the German expressions of the early German psychologists and so forth are of great importance, because an individuum in German as a noun means a unified, powerful being. Individuum means indivisible in English. And so he said that the individuum is what the human is striving for. The human wants to become unified. It wants to become an undivided self, where the various little internal demons that in modern times are called complexes and so are not fighting with each other, but finally begin to do business with each other and thereby advance the development, the higher consciousness of that individual. So these things are all, along with others that may not have to be mentioned at the time, were all really the discoveries of Sigmund Freud, the son of Polish Jewish people who moved from Poland to Austria and to Vienna at that time, very understandably, because about half of Poland belonged to Austria. So it was like we could say, well, all these people came from Texas to California. Well, it's just over there. Because Poland, as we know it now, did not exist. There was Austrian Poland, that is where the Freud family came from. There was German Poland, Prussian Poland, there was Russian Poland, which was the least happy place of the lot. That's just how it goes, But in any event, the little man who was really, the Freudians don't like people to mention this, but I'll mention it just because they don't like it. So let's say, the Freudians don't like to hear that Sigmund Freud was a discoverer and an advocate of a hidden element in the human, which is what he called the unconscious, and that it was his hope that by making the unconscious conscious, or at least more conscious than it is at the present time, the human would have a very promising psychological or psycho-spiritual future, which he doesn't have at this time. So, and in that respect, some interesting books have been written about that, but I'm not really here to review books. But let us say there have been writers, very learned people, who have indicated that Sigmund Freud's basic thesis of the unconscious, you might say of an other soul in the basement of the human consciousness, that these teachings have a forerunner in something earlier, and that forerunner is the Jewish Kabbalah. Now, of course, the Kabbalists don't call it the unconscious, but they indicate that there are things there in the human being that don't appear in the mirror and don't appear anywhere else. You have other selves within you, and that this in turn could have given, and nobody said that this is the gospel truth, or the Old Testament truth in this case, but that these are the possible forerunners of the teaching of the unconscious. All right, now that's well and good. But now the question is that these friends, disciples, other doctors, in those days what we call the psychiatrists now were called alienists. So if you get a book that says the alienist or something like that, don't think it's about somebody who came from Mars or Alpha Centauri, that kind of an alien, but because that was the official name. So a whole bunch of these people, of Viennese descent, all gathered around Freud, and they had them really quite a time. Freud was appointed after a while a docent, which is a German university expression for a certain kind of a teacher. A docent is not a university professor. He doesn't have all the emoluments of the full university professor. But the docent is allowed to teach, usually at the time when the regular professors are at home drinking their beer. And so Freud was given a docentur, and that really comes from the Latin doceo, which means I teach. So he was what would we call it, a kind of a second-grade teacher at Vienna University. But even with that, and with the people who gathered around him, and the fame that he gradually acquired, especially after the year 1900. It's really strange how dates in history can become extremely important. The turn of the century, in the year 1900, there appeared a modest-sized book entitled The Teaching About Dreams. And this was Freud's magnum opus. In fact, he considered his discovery of the psychological symbolism of dreams as probably his greatest discovery. And he always, I had to study his life and all of these things because I was working for the then greatest American historical novelist, Mr. Irving Stone, God rest his soul, and God rest his soul, not his stole. He didn't have a stole, I don't think. But so in that fashion, it was evident that Freud felt that he made a great discovery. And he symbolized it in the discovery of the meaning of dreams. Why? Not just because he liked dreams like some of us do, especially if they're good dreams, but because he felt that in the dreams, this new continent of thought, that was actually one term that he used, the new continent of thoughts, which is the unconscious, would manifest. And that if you had access to a person's dreams, then you would have access to his or her unconscious. So it's the key to the unconscious. And Freud was always dreaming about the fact, which never came to pass, that on the house where he lived and where he had his office, for posterity there would be a plaque. And the plaque would say that in this house, Dr. Sigmund Freud, in the year 1900, discovered the meaning of dreams. He considered that really the greatest discovery. So in any event, moving away from that, obviously the new psychology, as it was called at that time, had a lot of people interested in it. First of all, medical doctors, alienists, what now we would call psychologists, but all kinds of other people. And especially when Freud kind of jumped the gun and allowed it to be known in his book and otherwise that the unconscious is particularly interested in what? In something that most people are interested in, sex. So that really kind of blew the stack, you know. And people said, "Oh, but there were various people who said that that's quite understandable, especially if you live in Vienna, because Vienna was the entertainment capital, more so than Paris. The Viennese really like to enjoy themselves, and you know and I know that among human enjoyment elements will enter which are of a sexual nature. I am not proclaiming that, I am not approving of it. Go and argue with Jehovah on Mount Sinai or something like that, but that is the truth. So now, of course, that became a problem, because right away the Viennese divided themselves sort of into two groups. Those who said, all right, yeah, we want to know more about sex, maybe it'll be fun. Or on the other hand, they say, they're just trying to bring in that dirty stuff into the study of the mind, and this is not a good thing. All right, so publicity was going around, then as now. When you write about sex and talk about sex, it usually arouses interest of some kind or the other. So in any event, the fame of Freud and Freudianism, as they called it at that time, spread over Europe, and probably some of the first places where it spread were the German-speaking countries, of course Austria, but also Switzerland. Now, I don't want to be mistaken in my statement. Switzerland is not all German-speaking, but the dominant language is German. You can have Italian in Switzerland, you can have French in Switzerland, you can have Rhaeto-Romanic, which is the ancient language of the country. And did I miss one? Well, if I missed, I already mentioned at least a few. So the Swiss, in Switzerland, there was a young doctor, born in 1875, but having grown up and become a medical student, and from a medical student a recently graduated doctor with the specialty of what we now call psychiatry, in which at that time they called, as I mentioned before, the alienism. Now, this doctor, who by that time was he was the chief assistant alienist in a large mental hospital, where his professor who taught him at the university was the head doctor. So Jung was sort of the if I understand the history correctly, he was sort of the second most important psychiatrist in the Burg Hölzli hospital outside of Zurich. Now, so that gave him, of course, a certain status, especially since his chief doctor at that university, the famous Dr. Hoeller, who was internationally famous in his field. So now let's kind of take a little episode, because every story is a myth. That doesn't mean that it's false, but it's a story. So the story was that the young doctor, Freud, was still fairly young, and Freud was a very good-looking man. He had a dark beard and a dark curly hair and a nice stature. So I would say that he probably knew something about the sexual proclivities of the Viennese populace. Probably, maybe from personal contact, but I don't want to bring that up, and that's why I brought it up. So, in any event, Dr. Jung from Zurich said, you know what, I've got to go over there to Vienna and visit this new celebrity, this Freud. So he got on the train and went to Vienna, and he had announced himself. He had an audience, or whatever you wish to call it, an interview with Dr. Freud. And so Freud owned, you're not interested in these details, but when you worked on the biography of somebody, then you remember all kinds of little stuff that you shouldn't remember. But of course, one of them was that Freud lived in a nice big Viennese apartment at Berggasse 9 in Vienna, and had this very impressive office in which there was a couch. Now, where was there a couch? Well, because Freud started out and really got his start with these discoveries about the unconscious and so forth with hypnosis. It's not very often known. And of course, he had a partner who was an expert hypnotist. But then, as people will in Vienna, the two partners argued, and then they split up. Now, here was Sigmund Freud in his beautiful office, and he did not know how to hypnotize. Hypnotists tell me that it's not very difficult, but in any event, so now, what is he going to do? I'm now going back a little bit in time. He said, well, let me see if I can find another way into the unconscious where we can make valid conclusions about the unconscious than hypnotism. But one thing he kept from his hypnosis days, and what was that? The couch. The couch. The Freudian couch. And ever since then to the present time, in most places, when you go into a Freudian psychologist's office, there will be the couch. But in any event, the couch was undoubtedly there, and Dr. Freud was there, sitting behind his desk, talking with Jung. And believe it or not, one thing that very soon came up was that so many people were interested in the world, at least in Europe, in the occult. The occult. And Freud was, at least outwardly to Jung, somewhat disdainful of it. Now, I am convinced that that was a put-on job, because Freud was extremely interested in spiritualism, in mediums, in clairvoyance, in all kinds of stuff. But to confess that to a colleague by then, fairly important colleague, that was too much. And so he said, he says, the black flood tide of occultism is coming in and more or less indicating it's going to replace our profession, psychiatry and so forth. And Jung sat there quietly and he said, I know what you are talking about, but I think that you are looking at this maybe in a little bit in the wrong way. He says, why? Because at least some of these phenomena exist. He says, I know that they exist. And he says, what do you mean? Well, for instance, there spiritualist mediums and other psychics are wont to cause noises in a room, raps as they call it, and it's not done by any physical means. So what is that? And Freud says, yeah. Are you familiar with that? Well, he says, yes, I'm a little bit familiar with it. In fact, Dr. Freud, very soon now there are going to be some raps in this office. What? said Freud. Okay. So boom, 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 out of the desk and out of the cupboards, these big noises came. This, whatever they are, energies or spirit or what, these things can make a lot of noise. That's why they are called in German a poltergeist. Polter means racket, so racketing spirit. You see, so Freud was visibly disturbed. And he jumped up behind his desk and he said, "No, Jung, I don't know how you do these things, but you better watch out and not do these things here in front of me too often." Well, says Dr. Freud, if you don't want to hear it, of course I won't. But you see, these things really exist. So there they were, argued a little more, but in a friendly fashion. And then Jung packed up and went home to Switzerland. That was the beginning of their contact. And for a considerable period of time, in that historical period, they became quite friendly. They didn't talk about spiritualism and raps anymore. And they published journals together and all kinds of things. I mean, Jung was really interested in Freud's theory in the unconscious. But while he did not say so, I hazard a guess, and I'll throw it in here, that what Jung was thinking was the fact that these phenomena of the occult, of the spiritualists, the raps of the poltergeists and things like that, that they had some connection with the unconscious. Because they were not consciously caused, but they were there. And so he began to deviate, so to say, from the Freudian model, while he was still the second most famous and accomplished Freudian analyst. By that time they were developing the method of the Freudians would be analysis. And the analysis would usually start with dreams. And dream analysis is still a lot of fun. The only person whose dreams I have a great difficulty analyzing is myself. But I have with some success, after all, been able to do that. Now, Are we cold, ladies and gentlemen? I see, yes. So what can we do with the heat? Because we do have a heat here.
I can turn the heat on, but then you're going to have to raise your voice considerably.
Oh, does that work into it? Well, you turn it on and then wave at me in a hostile manner. You know, these are the privileges of wives, you see. They can correct you. But I have been in, as other people have, but during the war and so forth, as a 13-year-old boy, I practically lived in the snow. In fact, I have been buried in the snow up to the top of my head for an entire night and an entire day one time. How I survived it, I don't know. But the planes were overhead bombing and everything else, you know. At least when you're under the snow, they don't see you. They are snowblind. So in any event, I don't like the cold weather anymore. Why do you suppose I ended up in Southern California? I could have ended up in Florida, but I ended up here. So anyway, Freud and Jung have continued to collaborate, as I said. They wrote chapters in books together. They wrote in various journals together, and seemingly got along really well. And until Jung, I don't know how we are doing all right, not too bad. So Jung developed a great interest in mythology, religion, and the occult. He did not reveal all of that. He did not reveal all of that to Freud, but he did. And then they were sort of arguing back and forth and then this and that. So at some point, Jung, I mean, they were all writing books. You know, that was their way of relating to the field. So Jung wrote a book about the symbolism of the unconscious. My geriatric memory does not recall I always knew the exact German title, but in any event, that's what it was. And in that book, he indicated, still in a very sort of mellow fashion, he indicated that the stories of mythology, the stories of the various religious scriptures in the world are stories that come from the unconscious. That it's the unconscious speaking in this manner. And he was quite strong about that expression, and Freud didn't like it. Freud was, like most scientifically trained people at that time, dyed-in-the-wool atheist. But of course, Jung was not. Jung was not only the preacher's son, although he did never participated much in his father's church, but he was someone who had unusual experiences, dreams, visions, hallucinations, various things already as a young man. And as such, he knew that whatever you want to call it, manifestations of the unconscious or anything else, that there there was a wider field available to consciousness than what Freud claimed. And so here became the conflict between the two. Many people have felt, the good-natured people, that maybe that conflict shouldn't have happened. Well, all right, but neither should the eruption of the Vesuvius not have happened, you know. So those kinds of arguments are pointless. But so the disagreements became more and more deep until eventually, in a not very hostile way, but still in a somewhat unpleasant way, they parted company. And the school of Jung in Switzerland became one school of depth psychology, as we call it now, and the school of Freud in Vienna another. Okay, so now there were two psychoanalyses or two depth psychologies, and undoubtedly this caused the medical profession some grief and so on and so forth, but that was really the beginning of the time when Jung began to blossom on his own and begin to bring forth teachings which were really his own instead of having to follow Freud. So there was a definite division. Jung fairly soon, I mean, certainly we don't have the time to go into all the details, but Jung fairly soon characterized a certain part, the deepest part, and therefore perhaps the most important part of the unconscious, as the collective unconscious. While Freud stuck with his unconscious, das Unbewusste, and so forth. And so the two approaches diverged from each other, but not that terribly much. And yet, who is to say why? Maybe undoubtedly great and famous people often have a strong ego. That may, and the two of them may have been involved, but in any event, now the two schools, the Vienna school and the Jewish school, became separate. And now, what more is there to say? Jung was always interested in what we would call, because we don't have any militant atheists in our room, that we would call a spiritual attitude toward the psyche. In fact, later on in his life, of course, interestingly enough, specifically in connection with Gnosticism, he came up with this statement that religion deals with the psyche. Religion is an activity of the psyche, and some religious traditions are maybe more psychological than others, but on the whole, they indicate a vital contact with that part of the human character that ordinarily in life is not evident. So then he already in the book that divided him from Freud on the symbols of the unconscious, I can't quite get hold of it at the moment. Excuse me?
Symbols of transformation.
Symbols of, the English title, you are right. The English title was Symbols of Transformation, although the German title is a little bit different. In any event, so on went the situation, and now two significant schools, two significant ways of dealing with depth psychology came into existence. Needless to say that the people who were oriented toward the spiritual in one way or the other, as time went on, became much more friendly toward Jung than they were toward Freud. Understandably. After a certain point, but that was quite a few decades later, Pope Pius XII gave an award, the special blessing to Jung, because he felt that the Jungian psychology had cured so many Catholics that he felt that he should congratulate the Pope on having a very good school of psychology. Now that's my way of putting it, but in any event, and or as the result of that interaction, the Pope also sent Jung a papal decoration. So there, and after all, Switzerland and Rome are not so that far from each other. So it's understandable. However, let's say when I came in contact with some of the earlier works of Jungian psychology, particularly in Austria, I could see, yes, of course, he sees the immense power of spiritual things, but that doesn't mean that he would make a good Orthodox Catholic or Protestant. I could detect that there was something there. And then eventually, as I studied Jung's career more, I discovered that if he was interested in any religion at all, he was interested in Gnosis. And it may be of interest to you to learn, if you haven't learned it before, the convergences that, as you of course know, or most of you know, Blavatsky had a student, had a disciple who was her secretary. He gave the funeral oration on her death in England when she died. And his name was George R.S. Mead. George Mead was an Oxford scholar, a great scholar of Greek and Latin, and had a great interest in the spirituality of the ancient world, and wrote a 3-volume book already about Hermeticism, and then started translating all the Gnostic scriptures that were available already at that time. And in her last year of life, Madame Blavatsky wrote a commentary on one of the articles in the journal of Mead, and lauded him highly as to how greatly he was interested in Gnosticism and how this was a very, very important thing. So to add something to it, somewhat later in history, in the 1930s or so, C.G. Jung, who by that time had bought more than one copy of all of Mead's books, and I have here a photograph of a shelf of the Jung Institute in Zurich, and on there, I wouldn't have asked anybody to take the photograph, but in it, both in English and in German, is my book, The Gnostic Jung. And the person who took that photograph was assured that this had been there since the early times and was compiled in this manner by Jung's son, the head of the family, who wrote to me a very, very nice letter when I sent him some materials. In any way, let us say the linkage, informal and yet present linkage of the Gnostic tradition and of Jung was there from the beginning, and it got stronger as time went on. So we might say that of Western spirituality, because he studied Buddhism, he wrote the introduction to some of the books on Tibetan Buddhism and so forth, and he studied everything. But he was more than a little fond of the Gnostics, which in turn makes these Gnostics more than a little fond of C.G. Jung. So let us see, and now more and more of the material is coming forth. Now, however, in order not to keep you here longer and all that sort of thing, I need to make a conclusion. And the conclusion is to the effect that Jung was, in my opinion, and I don't know, he might throw one of his cigars at me if he were here in life, but my view of Jung's is that he was a modern Gnostic, that his spirituality resembled that of the Christian Gnostics of the first 3 centuries to a very great extent, but he was a Gnostic in that spiritual discipline, just like other people are in something else. In other words, people can be scientists in a particular scientific discipline, but still have certain spiritual allegiances and preoccupations. And so when you add all of these together, it is not to be wondered at that another and certainly less famous modern Gnostic, whom you are listening to now, had also developed a great devotion to and a great interest in C.G. Jung. In fact, Jung, just to indicate how Jung felt about these matters, because actions speak better than words, Jung, who was no longer a Jung, wasn't very young at that time. Jung went in the 1930s to London with one objective. He wanted to meet G.R.S. Mead, Blavatsky's former secretary and the great scholar of Gnosticism. And he went there with the specific objective of thanking Mead for his wonderful translations and commentaries on the Gnostic scriptures and how greatly they have redounded to his own benefit. And this is historical truth. This is not a wishful fantasy of a modern Gnostic like myself, but that actually did happen. And to this day, on another shelf are all of G.R.S. Mead's books on Hermeticism and Gnosticism put together. So all of this indicates that Jung, like a lot of great people, was a man of many talents, of many interests, and of these certainly depth psychology was his profession, but he also could see the convergences and the overlapping features of his psychology and the foundations of his psychology with some of these ancient spiritual traditions. And now the title that I gave my talk, I never talked about thus far. So let me just see that the reason, not the reason why I didn't talk about it, that's because I'm an old man who is forgetful. But the reason that I have the red book here for you to see and one volume of the black book here to see is the fact that there was, in addition to all of this that I've been regaling with you here, there was also a secret Jung. And that secret Jung was the one who sat in his house in Zurich and who wrote fabulous, fantastic, and astonishing accounts of his own interior visions. And he wrote these down just like a typical, meticulous and artistic Swiss, because that's what the Swiss are. He wrote down these visions, one after the other, chapter by chapter, and illustrated them with magnificent, beautiful pictures. And he had the book which he wrote with his own pen. He had the book subsequently bound in red leather, and he called it the Rote Buch, the Red Book, or also the Novus, let's see, what did he call it? The Liber Novus, the new book. And it's a fabulous thing, and I'll be very happy if you look it over. Due to my interest and to the generosity of my friends, I have 3 copies of it, and a 4th one, which is a little traveling book, like a traveling Bible. And the reason that I bought that one was because a good friend of mine from the Midwest, darling man, good Gnostic, came out here for a series of lectures of mine. And he wanted to read the Red Book on the way from Illinois to California. And he took one of these huge books with him in the airplane, to the consternation of the airplane personnel, but they didn't take it away from him. And then I said to him, you know what, I find out if there is the same thing but a smaller edition without the illustrations, but everything else is there. And so he gave him that book, and he travels a good deal and still reads it on the airplane. So that is the Red Book. Now, what it is on account of the interior visions, the transformative experiences, the strange inner life of C.G. Jung, which obviously he was not going to disclose in his lifetime to the public because it have caused further controversy. Now, if it hadn't been for a man to whom we all owe, I think, a tremendous gratitude, Dr. Sonu Shamdasani in London, this probably would never have been published. But Shamdasani became a fierce advocate of Jung and a fierce researcher of Jung, and he came across the Red Book, and he continued to work with it, and eventually he convinced the various members of the Jung family that it should be published to the public, which was a little controversial, because if Jung wanted that done, he would have had it done, but he didn't have it done. So why didn't he have it done? Now, there's too many have it done, so forget about it. But let's say the issue was that he felt that he would not be attacked and castigated any longer if it was published after his demise. And now there is a whole literature to which I have contributed my small share, which are commentaries on the Red Book, published in a place that has badly suffered from a hurricane recently in Ashland, North Carolina, where there is a Jungian publishing company. But in any event, it's a fabulous book. And then Dr. Shamdasani, who is of course devoted to this tremendously, without whom this would not have happened, Dr. Shamdasani uncovered in the course of his research that there was another body of literature. And this is the one that had been referred to as the Black Book. Not because its content is something dark and demonic, but because they had to have a difference between the two books. This one's red, those are black. And there are 5 little volumes of it. So I brought one of them. You can see what the black books are like. And those were basically visions and mysterious things that came to Jung in addition to the Red Book. And the Red Book, of course, he worked so much on. I mean, this is a work of art. Even without the illustrations, it's a work of art. And the artist was none other but Carl Gustav Jung himself. And I think it's a great blessing that it has come out. Now there are commentaries written about it. I wrote a little bit myself. And we have a way of comparing what could be called the secret life of C.G. Jung with his official life. And you know what? The two are not that much different. Not that much different. And also another great mystery was solved. And that was one that I know that we used to argue about over good Austrian black coffee in Innsbruck when I went to university there endlessly, that why was Jung in the full bloom of his years and at the full pinnacle of his career, why was he writing more books on alchemy than anything else? What's this all about? A Swiss psychiatrist, and he writes one alchemical book after the other. But you can see that he managed to discern, at least that is my opinion, that the content of these books, Red Book and Black Book, contains a great deal of material that is actually alchemical. And Jung, by studying alchemy, had the key to his own revelation. This is not just like people write key about the Bible, come and buy it. So he was set on the track of alchemy by way of his Red Book. Also, the book itself has alchemical content, but you have to see where it is. And all the big color plates, beautiful paintings in it, have been executed by Jung himself, and they are not really topically related to the text of the Red Book. Only theoretically, only in a visionary sense, but fabulous artworks. I can tell you that much, that when I was working on the Red Book, I was in my native country, the one visit that I have been allowed since the coming of the communists, and so I knew that the Red Book was here. Dr. Shamdasani had already told me it's going to be in Los Angeles too. But in any event, so I said, all right, I'm a lecturer, I'm going to give lectures about the Red Book. And so I wrote and subsequently delivered 13 lectures on the Red Book. And these lectures were the first complete series of lectures that anybody in Zurich or in Budapest or here had, the very first one. And all the translators who had translated, because the original is very largely in German, but all the translators read my translation and my commentary, for which I will be always grateful to them, because that's the greatest compliment. And they wrote me very nice letters. But I can tell you this, that those pictures, full pages, you can open it up and see them. Those pictures, if you look at them for a while, they will do something to you. I would be sitting at my dining room table writing the commentaries for the lectures, and then in front of me was one of these magnificent pictures. And I couldn't remain in the room. I had to get up and go outside, because there were colors and forms and lightning flashes and weird stuff flying around in the room like it never did before and never did after. So let's say, and the plates have no relationship to the text, only in a very tenuous manner. But if you look at them for a while, the majority of them serve the purpose of what in the East is called a mandala. If you look at it long enough, you will experience a change of consciousness. So this is both a book of an astonishing text, a book of prophecy, in fact, and a book of a magnificent mystical art. So I hope that this has increased your interest in them some, and to the extent that I'm still in this carcass for a while, I intend to do another, maybe less elaborate series on the Red Book here. And if not, then you bring a Ouija board or something and say, Stephan, here, come on, tell us what you said you were going to tell. I can't really promise that, but it would be fun. And anything that's worth doing, as a wise man once said, should be fun also. So thank you very much. I hope that this has brought you a little closer to Carl Gustav Jung and to his mysterious work, and that your interest will not wane in the coming years. Thank you.